If I need to get a bite, I'll reach for a jig worm. A jig worm seems to put fish in the boat no matter what the conditions might be. Got one on the jig worm here. Decent fish. Not a huge one, not a bad one. Got the jig worm down his throat. Classic Minnesota bait here, North Country, fishing weed lines. There's so many different ways to fish a jig worm. A lot of different variations on it. We'll get this one back. We'll sit down and kind of break down the jig worm, different worm styles, heads, hook shanks. There's a lot to it for a simple bait, and you can mix it up quite a bit and give the fish a bunch of different looks. It's an awesome bait, really good cleanup bait. Once you fish an area for a while, you know there's fish still there. Jig worm is super deadly to put some more fish in the boat. This is the standard one that I throw for the most part. Just a chartreuse head, 4-inch green pumpkin stick worm. This is an 1/8 ounce head. And these jig worms that I throw have a little bit longer shank on them. Here's just your standard Ned style hook and shank. And you can see the jig worms, longer hook shank, a little bit wider gap on there than your typical Ned. Another fun size one on the jig worm. Decent little chunk, not a huge one. Pretty easy rigging. You know, you're just threading that thing right on the hook. You know, one thing you might do is lay the worm next to the hook shank so you know where it pops out. Kind of right in the middle of that egg sac there. So we'll thread it on till we get to the middle of that egg sac, poke it out, just thread it all the way up. Biggest key is just making sure that worm's pretty straight on there. When it falls, it's gonna glide nicely instead of spin. A couple other styles is just a skinnier worm, you know, a black straight tail. I think this is a Zoom finesse worm. Just more of a brown, smaller tail finesse worm. You can also just go up to a 5-inch stick worm and just play around with different colors, different styles, see what those fish want on that particular day. Non-intrusive, I guess, would be a good way to describe it. It's just a nice, simple, slim profile. You know, whether it's a worm on a drop shot or a Ned or a jig worm, they just really seem to eat them. It just fits that niche that we tend to have a lot of success on in these natural lakes. Not a bad one. Oh, there, buddy. All right. Spot lock here quick. Decent jig worm fish there, right on the edge. That thing bit it right almost below the boat, right on the fall there. Good chunk. Get it back. Ever since I can remember, 20 years ago, they started out as this mushroom style head. And what I mean by that is it's got a real flat bottom to it and a mushroom rounded top. And a couple reasons for that. You know, your worm is gonna sit up perfectly flush with that bottom half. So it's a real streamlined, you know, package there, which is really nice. And that mushroom head is just about the right shape that it gets hung up in the grass, but it doesn't just plow into it where you can't get it out. When I'm throwing a jig worm, I like to get it hung up in the grass and pop it free. And that's a lot of times where your reaction bite comes from. Decent one. Another jig worm fish. And that was a light bite. It's got it pretty good though. All right, there we go. Man, they're eating that thing pretty good. He's got that thing choked. Another decent fish right on the edge. For me, a jig worm is just like a bite getter. You know, it catches big ones too. You know, it just has the right profile for the size of the bait that we have in a lot of our natural lakes. Ooh, baby. Well, gosh, we got a good jig worm fish, guys. So like we've been saying, small finesse bait still catches great big ones. Let's see how you can land this thing here. Oh, look at that. What a tub. Jig worm right in the lip, upper lip. Man alive. That is why we throw a jig worm in Minnesota. Big old bass. It doesn't just catch little ones, folks. That's what we look for. That's what a 4-inch little stick worm can put in the boat for you. Let's get her back.